So I'll begin by stating that this video message has been created in an attempt to get the attention of Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Let me get straight to the point, because there are several important points to be made here. Point number one, I do not believe that it is a coincidence that during the last week of January 2025, I just so happened to visit my local library to request and reserve a copy of Graham Hancock's book entitled Magicians of the Gods, The Forgotten Wisdom of Earth's Lost Civilization. Within 1 week after having placed my request, I received notification on Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, that the book had finally arrived and was ready for pickup. 3 days later, on Friday, February 7th, 2025, I went to the library where I checked out Magicians of the Gods. In a little over a week after having picked up the book, I had finished reading it from beginning to end. Point number two. After having read Graham Hancock's book, I do not believe that it is a coincidence that on Thursday, February 20th, 2025, I happened upon a YouTube video entitled The 26,000-Year Cycle That Resets Civilization. In this video, Randall Carlson is giving a lecture about the precession of the equinox and the 26,000-year precessional cycle. Point number three. I do not believe that it is a coincidence that in the month of February 2025, I am preparing to complete and promote a project that I started in November 2016. This particular project that I speak of is directly related to my having decoded the stone tablet that you see before you. As I have interpreted, deciphered, and decoded the hidden messages that are contained within this artifact of great antiquity, I have created this video in an attempt to notify both Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson that it is within this ancient petroglyph that the Apkallu of Mesopotamia have encoded a timeless message. Having said that, I have every reason to believe that the timing and the intersectionality of events that I have described herein for the month of February 2025 are beyond coincidental, and that this series of events is not the direct or indirect result of universal randomness, chance, or perhaps happenstance. But rather, it would seem that this series of events appears to be by design. With that said, let's listen to certain points that Randall Carlson makes in his lecture on the precession of the equinox and the 26,000-year cycle that resets civilization.
And one of the books that I frequently have referred to is Hamlet's Mill, came out in 1969, in which they were a couple of highly esteemed scholars who actually believed that there was sophisticated knowledge in prehistory. And one of the things that they hypothesized was that ancient people had observed and knew about the precessional cycle, which is actually a very slow cycle. It works out to about 50 arc seconds per year of motion. How many of you have heard of the vernal equinox, the precession of the equinoxes? You know that each year the position of the sun at the moment of spring equinox, when day and night are precisely the same length, is drifting very slowly to the west, the opposite direction of all of the planetary motion. If you look at the sun, the moon, the planets, throughout the course of their cycles, you'll see they're all moving from west to east. But the vernal equinox, as is the fall equinox and the solstices, are all moving towards the west. That's why it's precession, not procession. But that increment is very small. It's 50 arc seconds per year. Now, how do you visualize that? Well, think about this. The full moon is about a half a degree displacement. If you look at the angle from our perspective out to the full moon or the orb of the sun, are both going to displace about a half a degree. So it takes about 72 years to move 1 full degree, for the vernal equinox to move 1 full degree. So if you started, at a very early age and begin to observe it for a full lifetime, you would soon realize that it has moved a little bit with respect to the stars. Of course, the problem is the vernal equinox, you're going to be looking directly at the sun. So I think ancient peoples had come up with more ways to determine that motion than to actually try to look at the sun and its position at the vernal equinox. Anyways, here's what the authors of Hamlet's Mill said. The equinoctial points, and therefore the solstitial ones too, do not remain forever where they should in order to make celestial goings-on easier to understand, namely at the same spot with respect to the sphere of the fixed stars. Instead, they stubbornly move along the ecliptic in the opposite direction to the yearly course of the sun, that is, against the right sequence of the zodiacal signs. This phenomena is called precession of the equinox, and it was conceived as causing the rise and the cataclysmic fall of the ages of the world. So they saw this connection in their research, they saw this connection of ancient people believing that somehow this cycle, which has often been referred to as the Great Year, was somehow related to a cycle of catastrophes on Earth that affected the like they say, or the rise and fall of civilization. The Greeks still had the old idea, but they asked themselves questions about it. What moved was the sky, but questions about the sky posed abstruse problems. The greatest was, of course, the slow motion of the tilt of the sky described above, which went through a great year of 26,000 years. Now, I mentioned 50 arc seconds per year, which isn't very much. It takes 72 years to move through a full degree. So if you multiply that by 360, you get the sort of the sacred number, if you will, 25,920 years, which is usually rounded off to 26,000. Now, we don't know if 25,920 years is exact or not, because of the fact, for one thing, we don't know if the precessional rate stays absolutely constant throughout the full cycle. So what we're observing now is actually slightly more than 50 seconds of arc per year. So that would mean that it's a little bit shorter than the magic number of 25,920. We just don't know. But typically, most textbooks that I've seen will round off the precessional cycle to 26,000 years. 25,920 is actually closer to the actual period of rotation based upon the current rate, measured rate of 50 plus a little bit of arc seconds per year. And I'm just drawing from a few sources here to convey the idea. The World Year of the Persians, this was a couple of Orientalists, highly respected in their field, who wrote in the Journal of the American Oriental Society, the notion of cyclically recurrent cosmic disasters, a catastrophe by flood, alternating with one by fire, has been traced from ancient Babylonia and Iran through Pythagorean and Stoic philosophy and thence into the medieval world. So this is, whether we go to the Greeks or the Mayans, the Hopi Indians, any number of cultures, both still extant and ancient, we find very similar ideas, and usually involving flood and fire, sometimes alternating, sometimes happening simultaneously. And we now know, though, that nature provides ways to do both on a very large scale. In classical Greek and Hellenistic literature, the doctrine of the Great Year was already connected with the myths of deluge and ekparousis. Now, that's destruction of the world by fire is deluge. The Greek term for that was cataclysmos. And then ekparousis is the destruction of the world by fire. These catastrophes were supposed to return periodically when the planets came together in certain signs of the zodiac. In the Persian system, we still find the deluge connected with the conjunction of the planets. Now, this idea here is that whether you accept this literally or not, and there's some rather tantalizing evidence to show that the influx of comets from the Kuiper disk may be connected to conjunctions of the planets. But the idea here is that they saw that the astronomical realm was the source of these catastrophes.
Having listened to Randall Carlson, we will now read selected excerpts from Magicians of the Gods. As we saw in Chapter 15, a great cycle of the Mayan calendar came to an end on 21st December 2012. It is the end date that was calculated to mark the once in 26,000 year conjunction of the winter solstice sun and the center of the Milky Way galaxy, a conjunction that is itself, because of the diameter of the sun and the limitations of naked eye astronomy, not so much a precise moment in time as a window 80 years wide spanning the period 1960 to 2040. We saw, too, how Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe uses solar and constellation symbolism to depict the exact same window through which, as any astronomical software program will confirm, the winter solstice sun is still transiting today. My intuition is that these devices, both the Mayan calendar and the Göbekli Tepe pillar, are an attempt, using the precessional code, to send a message to the future. I see the lineaments of that message also in the huge astronomical geoglyph formed by the pyramids and the Great Sphinx of Giza. Using the same code and their relationship to the constellations of Orion and Leo, these monuments draw our attention to the epoch of the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, and, through the symbolism of the return of the phoenix, to the epoch that falls half a precessional cycle later, as if to say, once again, our own epoch. The Mayan calendar and Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, however, refine the calculation as we've seen. If I understand the message correctly, we're in the danger zone, beginning now here in 2025, and will be until 2040. The year 2030 is, of course, exactly in the window of danger indicated by the Mayan calendar and Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. However, it doesn't have to be like that. First and foremost, the universe might spare us. In summary, a 26,000-year cycle, known as the precessional cycle of the equinox, is thought to be responsible for the rise and cataclysmic fall of civilizations. It is further thought that during certain periods of astronomical and cosmological conjunction, our world is subject to severe environmental changes and climatic disturbances. Based upon measurement and calculation related to the precessional cycle, as well as interpretations of the Mayan calendar, Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, and the astronomical significance of both the Great Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza, there exists the possibility that in the very near future, our world may once again be affected by this periodic cycle of catastrophe and its devastating effects of world-ending destruction. With that said, it begs the following set of questions. As it relates to the cycle of precession, why have I featured, highlighted, and emphasized certain talking points as written by Graham Hancock and as discussed by Randall Carlson? What does this information have to do with the stone tablet of the ancient petroglyph that you see before you? Well, the reason why is because the Apkallu Sages of Mesopotamia have encoded a series of timeless messages within this stone tablet that were meant to be understood, most specifically, at this particular time in both human and world history. As Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson possess knowledge and experience in matters pertaining to the cycles of precession and the effects of the 26,000-year cycle on ancient societies and cultures of antiquity, I am appealing to their expertise to evaluate and review these findings of interpretation. In so doing, and most specifically, I am calling their attention to information contained within Part 6 of this video series. In addition to Part 6, there is a configuration in Part 1 related to the topic of symbolism that appears to reinforce the notion of trial by fire. For it is at the very top of the pillars of foundation that the world is consumed by fire. I believe that once they have the opportunity to view the multi-part presentation in its entirety, they will be able to bring a deeper level of insight and understanding as to the overall message that is being conveyed in stone. As the project that I have been working on since November 2016, related to interpreting, deciphering, and decoding this ancient petroglyph, which has culminated into a multi-part video series entitled Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life, I invite viewers to watch the entire series and to draw their own conclusions as it relates to the timeless message of the Apkallu. Although the presentation has been developed as a 10-part video series, only parts 1 through part 6 are being released at this time. Sneak previews for part 7 through part 10 will be made available after the initial release of parts 1 through part 6. Having said that, I am appealing to the power of the internet and social media to assist me in getting the attention of Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Let them know that the content creator for the Arkhive of Antiquity channel is attempting to contact them in reference to an ancient artifact whose series of hidden messages have been decoded. Hello everyone, I'm your host Kim, content creator of the Arkhive of Antiquity channel here on YouTube. In this video, the topic of discussion will center around the decoding of an ancient artifact and what its interpretation of hidden messages may mean for the future of humanity. So I'll begin by stating that based upon my having worked to decode this ancient petroglyph, something is wrong in a way that is not very well understood at this particular time in history. Having said that, I will attempt to explain to viewers why I have drawn these conclusions. Several months ago, back in August of 2024, it was my original intention to complete the entire multi-part video series entitled Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life by the summer of 2025, and to make it available for public viewing around this time. The multi-part presentation has been developed as a 10-part video series, with part 5 consisting of 3 separate subparts. However, it was last year during the month of August 2024, when I was working on refining certain parts of the presentation, that I received what I'll define as a hyperdimensional form of communication and instruction to stop what I was doing and to extract a portion of content that I had been developing in part 6 and to place this content into part 7 for later development. Upon doing so, I received another spiritual impression that I needed to begin the process of proofing and refining the content that I had already completed for parts 1 through 6 for the purpose of making it publicly available as soon as possible. Now, at the time that I received this spiritual impression, I intuited a vague sense of urgency on the part of what I'll call a collective spiritual presence that has been with me for many years now. What I mean is that, based upon the many years of personal experience and spiritual interaction that I have had with this collective body of spiritual entities, this sudden and abrupt shift or change in course related to the long-term project that I have been working on gives me cause for concern. In other words, I will go so far as to say that it was as if this spiritual collective became aware of something in time, or something having occurred in time, or the possibility that something had changed in time. I'm not really sure. But I got the sense that whatever they may have become aware of back in August of 2024 was serious enough for them to override my original intention to complete the entire multi-part presentation and to make it publicly available by the summer of 2025. So instead of my being able to complete the video series in its entirety, like I had originally intended,
the spiritual entities that I am in communication with instead tasked me with developing a series of sneak previews for parts 7, 8, 9, and 10 to include supplement 8.5 and 9.5 in lieu of fully completing each of these parts. Now, as it relates to my communication with this spiritual collective, I have been in communication with them for many years now and have become accustomed to the way in which they attempt to bring my attention to something of importance or to bring my attention to something that they feel I need to be made aware of. Having said that, based upon the sudden and abrupt shift and change in course that I was directed to undertake back in August 2024, in addition to a series of coincidences that I experienced since this time, which culminate or converge as an informational cluster in the first quarter of 2025, it would appear that this spiritual collective is emphasizing a triangulation of connection between Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson's work related to the 26,000 year precessional cycle, Robert Grant's work related to the Great Pyramid, and Walter Henry's hypothesis related to what he terms as the Osiris device. This spiritual emphasis, if you will, is underscored by the interpretation of hidden messages that have been decoded from within this ancient petroglyph. With that said, there are three major points of emphasis that I would like to make here with regard to what the Apkallu Sages have encoded within this stone tablet. The first major point is the fact that within part 1 of this presentation, under the section which talks about various forms of symbolism related to both the world pillar and the world tree, there is a configuration that represents the pillars of foundation. It is the activity that occurs atop both of these pillars that is concerning. Now, you'll have to understand and appreciate the fact that I had originally developed and created this particular portion of the presentation way back in 2017 and 2018. Not knowing then what I know now about Graham and Randall's work as it relates to the 26,000 year precessional cycle, it would appear that there may be an underlying message or meaning that is being conveyed within this configuration. Which brings me to the second major point. It was between 2015 to 2017 that I had developed another configuration that I now believe may be connected to the activity that is occurring atop the pillars of foundation in part 1. I say this because during the month of December 2024, the spiritual collective of entities that I'm in communication with impressioned me to expand upon this particular illustration and to apply it to the series of interpretations that I have decoded from within this petroglyph. At the time, I got the sense that they were trying to emphasize some important point. One thing I would like to say is that this particular configuration that they had me to expand upon in December actually appears in part 10 of the video series. So it wouldn't be until I read Graham Hancock's book entitled The Magician of the Gods in February of 2025, and my having watched Randall Carlson's lecture on the 26,000 year precessional cycle within the same month, that I began to seriously wonder if all of these things were connected somehow. Which brings me to the third major point. Part 6 of this video series is jam-packed with important information that appears to be quite timely as it relates to our collective history of human existence on this planet. What I will say is that there is a very clear message that comes through in part 6, and that the hidden messages that have been decoded from within this petroglyph are attempting to warn and prepare all of humanity of impending change. As a matter of fact, I am going to go so far as to say that we are on the threshold of something very big, that something is on its way, and that something is incoming. With that said, I'm going to refer back to the configuration that appears in part 10 of this video series. When I thought about the possibility of what this configuration was conveying, I stated to myself within my mind that I needed to get in contact with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson to see if I could get some feedback about what it was that I had configured. In so doing, the collective body of spiritual entities that I am in communication with impressioned me as if in no, that at this time, the focus is on having people to watch the video series in its entirety in order to get an understanding of the timeless series of messages that the Apkallu Sages have encoded in stone. I do not know if their position will change sometime in the future, but for now, I think it highly important that as many people as possible have an opportunity to view the presentation for themselves and to draw their own conclusions. In the meantime, and in this Fishers of Men moment, there are several other individuals, in addition to Graham, Randall, Robert, and William, who are being called upon because of their knowledge, experience, or expertise related to ancient history, human origins, metaphysics, the Bible and biblical scripture, spirituality and the nature of reality, sacred geometry and numerology, the esoteric and occult sciences, as well as technical knowledge and experience related to mechanics and engineering. So, to that end, what I will say in closing is that I know what's coming in parts 7, 8, 9, and 10. I have pretty much laid down the outline and the architecture of the storyline for each part and have insight as to the nature of the messages that will be communicated when each part is finalized and released beginning in the spring of 2027. In the meantime, it will be important for viewers to watch part 1 through 6 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life, and to draw their own conclusions. I will also go so far as to say that it is imperative for people to most especially watch part 6 of this video series in preparation for that which is coming upon the earth. Thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and until next time. Well, that's it for this video. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified when we post new videos. Until next time.